Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article is about reduction in the corporate taxes. The corporate tax is a direct tax. This is imposed on the net income or profits that the corporate enterprises make from their businesses. The tax is imposed at a specific rate, and this is as per the provisions that are enforced in the Income Tax Act of 1961. What is the present context? The Finance Ministry has announced new corporate tax rate. It has slashed the corporate tax for domestic companies to 22% from the existing rate of 30%. Kindly remember, this is applicable for the new domestic companies and not for the companies which have already sought exemptions or incentives. These incentives or exemption can be in the form of tax holidays which have been there for about 3 years or for about 5 years. For such companies, this is not applicable. So any company which have not sought any incentives or exemptions, such companies will have a tax cut and it will have a tax rate of 22% and 30% will not be enforced on all these companies. Therefore, the effective tax rate for all these companies shall be about 25.17%, which is inclusive of surcharge as well as the cess. So all these companies will not have to pay any minimum alternative tax as well. But let's say, for example, there are companies which have already sought some exemptions or incentives or tax holidays for 3 to 5 years. Such companies will have to pay a tax rate of about 15% from the existing 18.5%. So there has been a reduction for those companies which have already sought some incentives, and for new domestic companies which do not have any incentives, they need not have to pay the minimum alternative tax as well. In order to attract investment in the manufacturing, local companies which are planning to get incorporated after October 2019, they will only have to pay a tax rate of about 15%. So kindly remember, such companies which will start after October 2019, they will have to ensure that they are into implementation, that they are into execution, and they are into operations by March 31st, 2023. In case they feel they would be able to bring up the operations by March 31st, 2023, such companies will also have the tax rate that is at 15%, and the current tax rate is at about 25%. So including the surcharge, all that they have to pay is about 17.01% of the tax rate. So any company which does not opt for this concessional tax regime and avails the tax exemption or incentive can continue to pay the same tax at the predetermined rate. However, after the expiry of the tax holiday or the exemption period, these companies can also opt for the new concessional rates as well. So what is the significance of this particular move that has been taken up by the government of India? There has been continuous slowdown in the Indian market. This is primarily blamed on two important parameters. What are those? One is the customer demand, where there has been a drop in the customer demand. The other one is the private investment, where there has been a drop in the private investments as well. In order to arrest the slowdown in the Indian economy, the government of India has taken another step, and that is to bring in and add in the private investments into the market. So one such move taken by the government is to cut down the corporate tax rate. A lower rate in the corporate sector also means that this can be compared to the Asian counterparts, which means when you take the countries like China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Bangladesh, they have very less corporate tax. So what we are doing right now is by reducing this corporate tax, we are as equal as the Asian counterpart, which means this will ensure that private investment happens, there is expansion in the private investment, and we are also persuading these companies not to go anywhere else but stay back in India. Because the tax rate in other Asian countries was lower, these companies used to go to another country. But because we have reduced the corporate tax, what we are indirectly referring to these companies is to come back to India and continue with their investment. So the basic idea is to ensure that this business is retained in India and we have more investment in the Indian market. It also restrains the Indian Inc. from demanding more jobs. Now that the government has cut down this corporate tax, all that the Indian companies will have to do is ensure there is investment in the market. The revised tax rate of the minimum alternative tax will also pave way for the new investment for the startups as well as the MSME sector. We did understand that the MAT or the minimum alternative tax is reduced and it is currently nil. So what it also means is that startups and MSMEs would be able to add value into the Indian economy. The unstated intention is also that there is protectionism. There is trade war that is happening between United States of America as well as China. So all those countries that have established sites in China are looking for alternative platforms. One such platform is what India is providing under this corporate tax rate cut. So it means all those companies which are currently there in China can move to India. Why? Because we have reduced the corporate tax rate. However, there have been certain concerns as well. The revenue foregone for this particular move is as much as 1,45,000 crore a year, which also means the tax revenues may also decline, which also means that we are putting a lot of pressure on the fiscal deficit as well. So the first key concern is with respect to the revenue foregone, where the government has lost about 1,45,000 crore, and this can be a major problem with respect to the fiscal deficit. So what it also means is the tax collections have previously not met the expected rate, which also means this tax cut will lead to lower tax collection in the short term as well as the medium term. So the government here has brought about a major stimulus, structural reforms, monetary policy reforms, and all this has been taken to revive the economy. This will add some value in the near future. However, what is required is a major structural reform when it comes to the long-term perspective. So all those measures that have been taken by the government till now will only add value at the shorter level. In order to bring changes at the larger perspective on the macroeconomic picture, what we need is certain structural reforms. So one such initiative that chief economic advisors suggest is that in order to bring these long-term structural reforms, what we need is the investment-led growth, which means there are some key sectors like the physical infrastructure, raising the human capital, and revival of the rural economy. In case the government has to bring about growth for the longer term, these sectors will have to be addressed, is another key point pointed out by the chief economic advisor. In a recent book that is released by Danny Roderick, who is an economist, discusses two challenges faced by countries like India. So what are these fundamental challenges? One is with respect to the infrastructure, and two is again to do with the human capital. So what this author in this particular book has commented is, in case India has to revive its economy for the long term perspective, the only medicine to this plaguing disease is infrastructure, infrastructure, and more infrastructure. A lot of progress has been made in the infrastructure. It is not that we have not added value to the infrastructure, but the problem that we see in this particular sector is that when compared with the other Asian countries, we are comparatively backward. India's urban as well as the rural infrastructure is, particularly when compared with South Asian countries and China, we are lagging behind. So what this author says is that we will have to improvise on the infrastructure. The second structural issue is with respect to the human capital. This basically includes the health as well as the education sector. Any demographic dividend for that matter will always have to be an asset and not a liability. In India, the problem is the education sector is at very bad level. The Niti Aayog says that only 2.3% of the Indian workers have formal skill training compared to 70 to 80% across the world in the developed countries. So what it means is our demographic dividend can become a liability in case we are not providing them formal skill training. So there are vast number of universities which have to comply by the standards of the global picture, but this is not being followed, is another major problem. So what is that the government will have to do going forward? So the government will have to take certain initiatives like disinvestment, reducing all those non-merit subsidies which we currently have in the form of loan waivers, in the form of agricultural subsidies, increasing the tax base in the current scenario, and also shifting from the revenue to the capital expenditures are some of the measures which the government will also have to take up. The construction sector was also one of the key sectors for the job creation in 2004 and 5 up until 2012. This sector has provided large amount of growth as well as employment. So the need of the hour is structural reforms when it comes to the land acquisition. So going forward, both immediate as well as the long-term structural reforms are needed to achieve higher economic growth. So the need of the hour is physical infrastructure, tackling the raising human capital as well as providing the stimulus to the rural economy is what is required going forward. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here says no GST relief for automobiles. What is the context? The GST Council, headed by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, comprising representatives from the states as well as the union territories, had its 37th meeting in the Goa. Finance Minister announced the reduction of tax rates for a number of items. So all these reduction will be implemented from October 1st, 2019. So kindly remember, this particular article has a focus on the automobile sector. So what it basically means is the government has initiated a number of reforms to arrest the slowdown. One is with respect to the investment in the private sector, where there is liberalization with respect to the FDI. Then there were merger of the banks. Then there was export sector liberalization. Incentives were awarded to them. And finally, what we have also seen is the reduction in the corporate tax rate. All this was being done. But one industry which has faced enough slowdown is the automobile sector. What is this? What is this issue all about? We have explained in one of the videos that we have uploaded yesterday. So kindly look into it. So this automobile sector was seeking certain cut in the tax rate when it comes to the automobile sector. However, this has not been implemented by the government of India. But the GST Council has cut tax rates when it comes to the hotels, and it has also reduced certain tariffs as well. By doing this, what the government has done is it has given a boost to the hospitality sector. In order to give a boost to the export sector, a zero GST has been pushed on the export of the jewelry. Further, the GST has been reduced on the cut as well as the polished semi-precious stones, where it has been reduced from 3% to about 0.25%. So this article in detail will again be explained in our economy this week, and an analysis and an impact to the economy will all be discussed on this video. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about the global climate strike. Before we understand what this is, we will have to understand about one of the persons who brought about this major transformation across the world. And the person that we are speaking about is Greta Thunberg. She is a 16-year-old climate activist. She is one of the world's youngest climate change crusaders, and she has delivered multiple speeches in the World Economic Forum in Davos, the European Union Parliament, the COP24, as well as to the UN Secretary General, where she has explored and given her ideas with respect to impact of the climate change. Now let us try and understand what is this Friday for the Future movement. This is one of the movement that began in August 2018. So what happens? Greta Thunberg goes against the Swedish government. Why? Because she feels that the Swedish parliament has not taken enough number of steps to fight the climate change. So what does she do? She goes right in front of the Swedish parliament every school day for about 3 weeks to protest against the lack of action on the climate crisis. She further continues her strike every Friday against the move of the Swedish government, where they were not able to enforce certain climate change policies in line with the Paris Agreement. So what is this Friday for the Future? So this Friday for the Future is where all the global children community come up together against their government for not enforcing climate related rules in line with the Paris Agreement. So this is nothing but a campaign which has seen students from across the world walk out of their schools every Friday to demand their political leaders take action to address climate change. So this is one section where the children come up and fight for the climate, and that is called as the Friday for the Future. A similar parallel movement where adults also come and join these children is what is called as the global climate strike. So a Friday for Future includes the children coming out and fighting against the government to enforce the climate change rules in line with the Paris Agreement, and when adults come into picture, that becomes the global climate strike. Now the question is, why are the students protesting? Why is that the global community have come together to fight against climate change in the student movement? That is because even though the climate change affects everyone, whether it is young or the world, the present generation of youngsters are the ones who are going to face the brunt of the climate change. It is the younger generation in the future which will face the consequences of climate change. They are the ones who will have to face all the issues when it comes to the climate change. So they are requesting the parliamentarians, they are requesting the politicians to address all these key issues when it comes to climate change. So it is this that we have to understand. However, we will also have another discussion after September 23rd. Why? Because there is a continuity with respect to this particular topic. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about the Parliament Budget Office. Politics in India is a race. It is a race to win the political battle and form the government. The political parties which form the government may come up with certain subsidies, doles, SOPs, loan waivers, policies and program which can ultimately help them win. They would retain their vote bank as well, but the problem is with respect to the macroeconomic front, where India will be the major sufferer. All these political parties will win the electoral mandate, but the economics of India, the macroeconomic principles will immediately be disturbed as well as harmed. One reason for these economically questionable actions is because the political parties will be able to reap the benefits from it. On the other side, there can also be a question where these legislators are not able to question the executive because they have no idea how the economics, the budget is functioning. Now let us try and understand what this overall picture is. We have the separation of powers. One is the legislature, the other one is the executive. So who prepares the budget and submits it? It is the executive. So the executive has got that monetary power to come up with certain budgetary reforms. This particular reform introduced by the executive is also questionable. How? They are questioned in the parliament. So the legislatures who are sitting in the parliament question the executive for all those moves and steps taken by the executive. So according to separation of powers, we have the executive, we also have the legislature. So it is the executive which prepare the budget, and this budget will ultimately go to the parliament, and it is the parliament which will question the executive. So the legislature is keeping the executive accountable. However, there have been a number of problems when it comes to this executive accountability. Why? The executive put forward the demand for the grants. So the legislature will have to discuss this, they'll have to debate it and keep the executive under check by questioning them about this particular proposal that have been enunciated by this particular executive. But the majority of these demands are in guillotine, which means there is no discussion, no negotiation, no discussion, debates happening on this particular proposal, and they are just put to vote without any discussion. It means the legislature is not questioning the executive, and all these proposals made by the executive are just accepted in the parliament. The second reason as to why there are no formal discussions, negotiations, debate is also because of the lack of expertise of the member of parliament. When you look at how the present architecture is, there are people who are coming up as legislators who have just passed their 10th standard. There are people who have just cleared their 12th standard, and there are also people who are graduates enough. But do these people understand the economics? Because economics in nature is kind of complex enough. Do these parliamentarians understand how the budget making happens? Even if they understand, will they be able to question the executive on the basis of this complexity? So because of the lack of expertise, because they are not able to understand how budget works, that is another reason as to why these executive are not kept under check. The MPs in India also do not have the staff or the members who can actually explain them what is happening with respect to the budget, and these people should also be independent of the executive. They should not be coming under the cloud of the executive control. So the major reason being that these MPs do not understand the complexity of it, and there is no staff to help them understand it, and there are no experts to help these MPs understand the budgetary matters. So basically the high quality research papers that has to be published with respect to the parliament is again missing under this particular balance. Added to all these woes, the parliament does not have an institutional structure, it does not have a library or a reference materials with respect to these type of complexities to make MPs understand how budget making happens when it comes to the executive. A remedy to address all these issues is by the establishment of the Parliamentary Budget Office. This Parliamentary Budget Office is a common feature across multiple countries like United States of America, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Hungary, Kenya, including our neighbor Bangladesh as well. Now let's try and understand what this Parliament Budget Office is all about. This is nothing but it is an office. It is an institutional structure which will have experts from the field of economics, budget analysis and public finance. So what they basically do is they provide the legislature with high quality analysis, that which is independent of executive. So they're not coming under the control of the executive. So the minute the executive or the people who make the budget present their budget, they will ensure a complete analysis of it, the economies of it, the advantages of it, the issue areas, all this will be looked into, and the same thing will be simplified. The complex parameters will be deconstructed and simplified so that this can be given back to the parliamentarians. So what happens during this process? The simplified concept of budget will now be given to the parliamentarians, that is the legislature. So the legislature can question the executive, and the executive will now become accountable to the legislature. So they specialize in objective and policy neutral analysis on the full budget cycle, the broad fiscal challenges facing the government and budgetary trade-off, and the financial implications of the proposals of the government. So such research can raise the quality of debate and scrutiny in the parliament, as well as enhance the fiscal discipline. So most importantly, it strengthens the role of the legislatures in the parliament to ensure financial oversight as well. Now there is a question. We already have the Auditor General. It already performs certain actions as well. It also keeps a check on the Government of India and its executive. So why do we require a new office in the form of Parliamentary Budget Office? How is it different from the Auditor General is the next important question. So what happens when it comes to the Auditor General is it basically executes that particular function which is like a post-mortem. So the government has already executed a project, the government has already come up with policy, the government has executed a particular program. So the CAG or the Auditor General will look into this particular program and do a post-mortem. So how is Public Budget Office different? What Public Budget Office does is it does what is prospective in nature. So the minute there is a proposal from the executive, initially during the first phase, this will be analyzed and it will be submitted to the legislature. So the Auditor General, which does a post-mortem, is after the government execution, but the Parliament Budget Office does a prospective study even before the government executes a project. So when it comes to the Auditor General, it does a particular examination of that particular project after it is executed, but when it comes to the Parliamentary Budget Office, even before a program is executed, it makes an analysis of it and submits the same to the legislature so that they can keep the executive under check. So what is the significance of this particular move? The amount of information parliamentarians need to scrutinize the budget documents would exponentially increase, and this particular Parliament Budget Office assists the parliamentarians in the process of scrutiny. So the first key important factor, it will simplify the budget and it will provide the financial oversight. The work done by the Parliamentary Budget Office also means that this work, this research analysis is also right in front of the public, which means the media would be able to take this up. They would also be able to have enough debates in the media, and the electorate would also be able to question the executive as well. Apart from the legislature questioning in the parliament, parliament, because right now it is also present in the public forum. The public would be able to have enough debates, and then the media can also telecast the same to the executive as well. So by conducting such a mechanism, what we also have is the evidence, and it is this evidence that can be used by the general public to question the executive. So this is the significant aspect for the establishment of the parliamentary budget office. However, there have been certain challenges as well. What are these challenges? It is important for us to understand that this parliamentary budget office can only provide independent research. So they provide an analysis, but it is the legislature who will have to question the executive. It certainly cannot prevent the executive from taking bad fiscal decisions in case the legislature is not questioning the executive. The office of the parliamentary budget office will also require enough number of staffing. In case the staffing is not present in terms of quality or quantity, then again suitable evidence based research papers cannot be submitted by this particular office. And in case there are less number of staff, it also means timely data is again not provided to the legislature. So what is the major problem? One, a staffing is required. In case the staffing is not provided, the quality may miss, and at the same time timely data is not provided to the legislators. The public budget office should also be insulated from the executive, and these officers should not desire any quid pro quo from the executive or any pecuniary benefits. So a closer check by the legislature is also a necessity in this particular backdrop, so that they are completely independent from the executive and insulated from the executive. So what is the conclusion that we can draw? Legislatures across the world have witnessed an increasingly stronger executive. That is why India's parliament and government need to work quickly and energetically to establish such an office, and it is in the interest of everyone in India that this has to be established, is what this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article says India Mongolia to explore space together. What is the context? India and Mongolia have signed memorandum of understanding on space cooperation as well as the disaster management. This space cooperation is for the peaceful exploration of the outer space, and this includes both for the remote sensing as well as for the weather forecasting. India and Mongolia at present also carry out regular military exercises named as Nomadic Elephant as well as Conquest. So what is this Nomadic Elephant? This is nothing but a joint exercise to promote military associations between India as well as Mongolia. This was first held in the year 2004, and ever since it has been conducted annually. The aim of this particular exercise is to develop synergy, understanding, interoperability between the armies of both these countries. Then we also have something called as the Conquest. This is nothing but an annual Mongolian military exercise that is usually held for about 1 week. Under this conquest, there are about 12 or odd countries which all come up together in the region of Mongolia. They exchange their practices all for the multinational peacekeeping operations. Both these countries, recognizing that extremism and terrorism is a major and grave threat to the humanity, have come together, reiterated their strong condemnation of this terrorist activities in all its form and manifestation. The two sides also reaffirmed that terrorism cannot be justified on any ground, whether it is religion, creed, nationality, and ethnicity. So what these countries seek for is an anti-terrorism module or an anti-organized crime capacity, where the developing countries and the global community come together to address this menace of extremism and terrorism. The Mongolian side reiterated its support for the India's candidature for permanent membership of the United Nations Security Council as well. So India at the same time has also announced that it will continue to have capacity building deals with Mongolia, where it will have programs for the citizens of Mongolia across multiple professions as well. So it is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article is speaking about Draft Information Technology Intermediaries Guidelines Amendment Rules of 2018. We will not be discussing this because there could be certain changes that will be introduced by the government. So once we have a clear picture, we will have an elaborate analysis of this particular topic. Now let's look into some of the prelims practice questions. Consider the following statements. Polavaram project is a multi-purpose irrigation project with a dam across the Godavari river. Its reservoir spreads in parts of Chhattisgarh only. Which of the above statements are correct? The answer to this is one only. Why? Its reservoir not only spreads in Chhattisgarh but also in the state of Odisha as well. So the answer to this is one only. Why have we picked this up? Because there is a reference with respect to the Polavaram project. Now let's look into the next practice question. With reference to the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, it is an act enacted for protection of animal species only. Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 provide absolute protection. Offences under these are prescribed the highest penalties. WLPA is against taxidermy. Which of the above statements is correct? The answer to this is 2 and 3 only. Why? It not only includes animals but it also includes plants as well as birds as well. What is taxidermy under this particular option? Basically, it also includes the preservation of dead wild animal as a trophy or in the form of rugs, in the form of skin, horns, eggs, teeth as well as nails. So all this is also prohibited under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Why have we picked this particular question? That is because there is a reference that has been made with respect to the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Now let's look into the next practice question. The third neighbor policy is an initiative of which country? The answer to this is Mongolia. So what is this third neighbor policy? Let's understand them. Currently, when you look at Mongolia, it is sandwiched between Russia as well as China. So majority of its transactions were happening with reference to these two countries. So this third neighbor policy also means that it is wanting to open up its economy, trade with other countries as well. As of now, majority of its trade and economy is restricted to Russia as well as China. So in order for Mongolia to open up to other countries, such a policy is what is called as the third neighbor policy. Now let's look into the next practice question. Among the following, who are eligible to benefit from the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act? The answer to this is adult members of any household. Now let's look into the main practice question. Restricting internet access deprives people of their right to life, liberty, freedom of expression and privacy. Comment. We have discussed about this in our yesterday's CNA, so kindly write an answer for this question. Establishing the Parliamentary Budget Office in the Parliament is a legitimate measure to strengthen the reputation of our Parliament in budgetary governance. Discuss. We have discussed this in our today's CNA, so please write all your answers on the comment section so that you guys can have a peer review with respect to these answers. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.